The Invisible Architecture of Power. Introduction. Machiavellian psychology and hidden influence. Power rarely announces itself. It does not kick down doors or shout commands. Real power whispers. It rearranges reality so quietly that people believe the choices they make were always their own. This video explores the psychological mechanics behind what is often labeled Machiavellian manipulation. Not as a handbook for control, but as an examination of how influence operates beneath awareness. Understanding these mechanisms is not about domination. It is about recognition, defense, and autonomy. Human beings like to believe they are rational decision makers. We tell ourselves our beliefs are chosen, our emotions are authentic, and our loyalties are earned. But history, psychology, and behavioral science repeatedly show something uncomfortable. Most human decisions are emotional first, rational second. Machiavellian psychology is not about evil masterminds plotting in the shadows. It is about how power exploits natural psychological vulnerabilities: fear of loss, desire for validation, need for certainty, and longing for connection. Manipulation works best when it doesn't feel like manipulation at all. This is why the most dangerous forms of control don't rely on force. They rely on perception. When perception is shaped, behavior follows naturally. No commands are needed, no resistance is triggered. Throughout leadership, relationships, business, religion, media, and politics, the same patterns repeat. The language changes, the environment changes, but the psychological levers remain the same. This breakdown examines 10 recurring manipulation patterns, often described as extreme, not because they are rare, but because they operate at deep emotional and identity levels. Viewer discretion is advised, not because this content is graphic, but because recognition can be uncomfortable. Once you see these mechanisms clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee them. Awareness is the first step toward freedom. Destabilization and dependence. Reality shifts, emotional confusion, and attachment loops. One of the oldest manipulation strategies begins not with attraction, but with destabilization. When a person's emotional or psychological footing is shaken, they instinctively seek stability. Whoever provides that stability gains influence. This is why manipulation often begins with confusion. By subtly questioning someone's perceptions, memories, or emotional reactions, a manipulator introduces uncertainty. The goal is not immediate control, but disorientation. When certainty dissolves, dependence becomes possible. Intermittent reinforcement plays a crucial role here. Warmth followed by withdrawal, approval followed by silence, affection followed by emotional distance. The human nervous system reacts strongly to unpredictable rewards, far more strongly than to consistent ones. This is not romance, this is conditioning. The brain begins to associate relief with the manipulator. Emotional highs feel higher because lows are introduced intentionally or strategically. Over time, the individual does not crave the person, they crave the emotional resolution that person provides. In leadership and organizational environments, this appears as chaotic management followed by selective praise. In relationships, it appears as emotional push and pull. In politics, it appears as manufactured crises followed by promised protection. The pattern is the same: create instability, then position yourself as the solution. When someone becomes the emotional safe place after chaos, loyalty forms quickly, and often irrationally. This is not because people are weak, but because the human brain evolved to seek relief from threat. Understanding this mechanism allows you to identify it early. Stability that is intentionally disrupted is not leadership, it is leverage. Emotional chemistry and psychological hooks, validation, identity, and the illusion of connection. Human beings are wired for connection. Manipulation often exploits this by turning validation into a currency. Approval is powerful not because it feels good, but because it signals belonging. When validation is made scarce, encourage dependency. When someone learns that approval must be earned and can be withdrawn at any moment, they begin to modify behavior subconsciously, not because they are told to, but because the brain seeks to restore emotional balance. This is how influence becomes self-sustaining. Another powerful mechanism is emotional mirroring. When someone appears to understand your inner world deeply, it creates a sense of intimacy, but understanding does not equal care. In manipulation, insight is often used not to protect, but to predict and influence. Over time, the manipulated individual may feel seen in ways they never have before. This deepens attachment and lowers defenses. The bond feels intense, meaningful, and unique, even when it is strategically constructed. This is where perception becomes reality. Once emotional identity is intertwined with another person's approval, separation feels threatening. Criticism feels destabilizing. Silence feels painful. The emotional bond becomes less about love or respect and more about regulation. Healthy connection increases autonomy. Manipulative connection reduces it. Recognizing the difference requires emotional literacy, the ability to notice when your sense of self depends on someone else's reactions. Perception control and internal narratives, planting ideas, rewriting self-image, and psychological projection. The most sophisticated manipulation does not tell people what to think. It plants ideas and allows the mind to claim ownership. When someone believes a thought originated internally, resistance disappears. This is why subtle suggestion, framing, and repetition are so effective. Over time, beliefs shift without conscious awareness. Projection also plays a significant role. By subtly attributing negative traits, doubts, or fears to another person, a manipulator can redirect accountability. The target begins to question themselves instead of the dynamic. Past experiences are often weaponized here, not through overt attacks, but through selective reminders and emotional triggers. Old wounds are reopened to destabilize confidence, making the individual more pliable. Another critical mechanism is identity labeling. When a person's internal self-description is slowly altered, you're too sensitive, you overthink, you need guidance. Perception follows language. Once internal narratives shift, external control becomes unnecessary. This is not about intelligence. Highly intelligent people are often more vulnerable because they trust their reasoning abilities. But manipulation bypasses logic and operates at the emotional framing level. Awareness disrupts this process. When you learn to separate your inner voice from external influence, autonomy returns. Part 5. Withdrawal, power, and autonomy. Timed absence, control illusions, and reclaiming agency. One of the final manipulation patterns involves strategic withdrawal. When presence has been established as emotionally regulating, absence becomes painful. Silence creates urgency. Distance triggers fear of loss. The individual seeks restoration, often at the cost of boundaries or self-respect. This is not accidental, it is psychological leverage. But here is the critical truth: control only works when it remains unseen. The moment these patterns are recognized, their power collapses. Awareness reintroduces choice. Choice restores agency. Understanding manipulation does not mean becoming cynical. It means becoming conscious. Power itself is neutral. Influence is unavoidable in human interaction. The danger arises when influence operates without awareness or consent. This content exists not to encourage manipulation, but to immunize against it. When you understand how perception is shaped, you become harder to control. When you recognize emotional hooks, you can unhook yourself. When you see instability being manufactured, you can step back instead of leaning in. Autonomy begins with clarity, and clarity begins with understanding.